Okay, now we look into Sesostris III, or what was known by the Greeks as Senusret again. He was a great leader, the fifth king of the 12th Dynasty of Egypt, and one of the major kings of what would become known as the New Kingdom. Now, here we see the ancient hieroglyphs, and I can read this. This is stick like a duck plus shepherd equals the guy with the mouth makes the sun rise, and he's got a boat that goes on the water. He's clearly seen here, and then at sunrise he likes 3 pieces of toast and 1 egg sunny side up. Now, let's go. You know I'm kidding. That's actually his two names. That's Senusret and Katkare, written in Egyptian. Senusret III is probably the best attested king of the New Kingdom. He ruled the country for perhaps as long as 37 years as the fifth pharaoh of Egypt's famous 12th dynasty from around 1878 BC to 1841 BC. He's probably also best known of the Middle Kingdom pharaohs to the public because of this many cultural statues showing a man with a different look, often heavy eyelids and aligned countenance. Later statues seem to portray him with increasing world weariness. Taken along with a contemporary text, these statues seem to wish us to believe Senusret III was a king possessed of a concerned, serious, and thoughtful regard for his high office. And here you can see one of the famous pictures of him. We'll look at some more here later, and his giant Caucasian monkey ears here. But yeah, and my granddad had big ears. I think I inherited them somewhat from him, but you can see here clearly. Now, Egyptologists make a great deal out of Senusret III's third statuary. It's much closer in terms of the rigid ideological representations of earlier kings, and illustrates a shift in both the function of art and change in the ideological surroundings of the king. The human quantities of the statues give a sense of age and tension rather than the all-powerful king portrayed in older works. We see in these statues a shift away from the king as a god and more towards the king as a leader. And indeed, there's only a couple of times through Egypt where they stray away from looking in idealized image. Like it's often seen in the Greeks, all the gods and everything were all just like, they look like Arnold Schwarzenegger with a head stuck on them and things like that. And I'm sure somebody had a little fat roll and so on, but everyone is drawn to perfection. And another earlier time too is back in the 4th and 5th dynasties, whenever they showed people fairly realistic too, then they came up with the idea of the phenotype and started to go with that, and you could almost see the person in that phenotype, but not really anymore. But you look at a whole series of their statues and you might start to get an idea or a sense of the person, whereas some of these statues you can definitely just look at a few of them and get the sense of the person himself. He's said to have also been 6'6", by the way, a huge tall man here. So Senusret was the king's birth name, which means man of the goddess Wasret. He is also sometimes referred to as Senusret III or Senusert, or by the Greeks as Sesostris, as I've done my other video on. But we're not going to go there necessarily today. In the other video, it talked about his great campaigns running up into Anatolia and so on, and how whenever he defeated an army, he put up his stele, but if he easily defeated them, or they just cowered for him, he put up a stele with a female genitalia on it. Quite hilarious whenever you hear something like that in ancient times. Said it was to indicate that they fought like women. And Herodotus notes this, along with a couple of others. He's also sometimes referred to as his throne name, which was Ka Kore, which means appearing like the souls of Re, or the souls of God, or the sun god. Senusret III was most surely the son of Senusret II. Now this changes a trend of having alternate leaders during this period named Senusret and Amenemhet. So it goes back and forth with Amenemhet and Senusret, back and forth, and then all of a sudden it goes back. And we know of no co-regency with his father, though most of the previous 12th dynasty kings shared at least a few years of their reign with their sons, and a co-regency would clear up some questions about Senusret III's long reign. His mother may have been known as Kinum Met Nefer Hedjet Weret, People will cut that down to Knumet Weret, but we believe she was buried in or he was buried in a tomb near his pyramid at Dashur. Um, no, she was. I'm sorry. He was married to a principal queen named Mereret, who probably outlived him and may have also been married to his sister, Sit-Hathor. His son and successor was Nimhet the third, and so we can see it pivoting back again. This is a commemorative papyrus that they actually still have here, showing his Sed festival. Senusret III must have been a very dominant figure within this time. Manetho describes him as a great warrior, not surprisingly, because he also says he was a great height person. 4 cubits, 3 palms, and 2 fingers is what he was described, which is a little over 6'6", or 2 meters. In addition, he may have also been the model for the Sesostrit of Manetho and Herodotus, and we all believe that he was. He was probably a composite, though, actually, of a heroic Middle Kingdom ruler who was supposed to be a model for future kings, and then it was spoken of by these 2 great historians. And at the time, there was a lot of the colonies here, but then they had pushed it back up to here during his reign, all the way up past many of the cataracts that are there. While there had been fortifications built up in Nubia long before in Ramses' reign, where they had set up what you see there today, Amenhotep II and Senusret III's predecessors had not been extremely active in Nubia militarily, and some Nubian groups had gradually moved north past the Third Cataract and started weaseling in. Well, Senusret III initiated a series of devastating campaigns in Nubia very early in his reign, perhaps year 6, in order to secure his southern borders and protect the trading routes and mineral resources, for Nubia was really not named for the people. It was actually named for the gold that they could get there and that they got there in ancient times and wanted to go back and get. And it really wasn't about the people. We'll go into that, though, here shortly. Apparently, the Nubians were a troublesome lot during his reign, for Senusret III would again have to mount campaigns in at least the years 8, 10, 16, and 19 of his reign. Regardless, these campaigns seem to have been for the most part successful, for the king had inscribed on a great stele at Semna, erected in year 8 of his rule. Now it's in Berlin. He tells you, I carried off their women, I carried off their subjects, went forth to their wells, smote their bulls, I reaped all their grain and set fire to it. In other words, he killed their men, enslaved their women and children, burnt their crops, and poisoned their wells. The stele also provides that no Nubians were allowed to take their herds or boats to the north of the specified border, and so they weren't even allowed into Egypt during this time. But it seems a little bit worse than that whenever spoken correctly. Let's look at this, if we can, the actual Semna Stele. Well, before we do that, let's look at a few names so we know what we're talking about. When we look at Nubians in Egypt, let's see. So here it'll clearly tell you the word Nubian comes from the ancient Egyptian word nubt, which means gold, and so it was really about that. But then they, of course, called them the Nubians, right? Well, then we also know that they call them, and you'll see this on this statue, they'll call them Nihas, Nihasu, or Nihasi with a Y on the end of it. And we find that through ancient Egyptian or Coptic, Nihas means good for nothing or worthless, as you see right here. So this is their nickname for them, and it's kind of funny they get them to actually name themselves that in a way. But so here's a picture of Senusret and some of his guises, and I guess we'll look at that towards the end. Let's look at this PDF file here, which will actually show you. This is the Semna Stele itself, written in Egyptian, and shows you the words and how they go with it so we can follow it. The southern boundary, made in year 8 under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Kekare, who is given life forever until eternity, to prevent that any Nubian, Nihas Nub, so what is this? This is actually saying worthless Nubians, should cross it by sailing north. Whenever we see these lines 2, 3, 4, this is the lines of the scroll. They're putting it out here. They almost could have just done it in the other way. but they're putting it as the way the line ends, if you will. So to prevent that any Nubian should cross it by sailing north or by land, so they're not allowed to come up even that way, you're not going to even make it. With a ship or any herds of the Nubians, the Nahasu, which is kind of weird there. He calls them herds of people, herds. Apart from a Nubian who shall come to trade in Mergissa, the actual test says Icon. Icon is what became Mergissa later off of it, but Icon is actually the furthest northern boundary, and past that they made a trading post. So you're not even coming past that. Past that will be this giant fortress where they're like, nah, and then they raid from there and so on to make sure it doesn't happen. So they're not allowed to do that, apart from somebody who does come to trade in Mergissa or with a message or anything good that may be done with them. So in other words, they'll not do anything mean to these guys that just come out and do that, but there will be nobody trying to just lollygag down into Egypt. He says, but without letting a ship of the Nubians, the Nahasu, pass that sails north past Abu Sir forever. And it's actually not Abu Sir. This right here is He, and He is that side I'm talking about, like Icon, where they're not allowed to pass forever. So it's kind of odd that you see a lot of black people trying to tout that they were the Egyptians and all this, and a simple look into it will show you that they weren't, and then they weren't even really appreciated too much. Here's some of the statues they show for him, and you can see some of these younger statues and what he really might have looked like here. Shows a little crease in his forehead. Later he has them right around his eyes a lot more, and in the sides of his eyes. And you see these sallow eyes and his big monkey ears that he's got, so you can kind of detect him. And he has this gleam of confidence to him, somewhat a looking onward type of look. And you can see that reflected in a lot of other statues. This is a different one right here, but then it has the same look to it. You know, the snake broke off of it. But let's look at a few more here if we can. So here's a depiction of what people thought that he might have looked like. Of course, he could have been a whole lot more pale than that with the knowledge that we know now. That's just trying to be nice about it, I guess, in some ways. And then you'll have black people come up and try to Photoshop something and say, look, he was black. And it's like, you've just made a real tan Caucasian. That's all you've done with your Photoshop, sir. But anyhow, and again, a Caucasian, aquiline nose, thinner lips, thick eyebrows, big monkey ears. That's actually Merneptah, though. Here's another one of Sesostris, which we saw, and here's another one which is quite famous that shows you that same look. I mean, you can through this probably catch the idea of how he might have looked, and through this and get that same simple idea that he had a little bit of a sallow look. I can't describe what is said that he may have looked like other than that. This is one of his earlier statues, and you can still see those eyes and things that's going on to him and the big ears and so on, but this looks extremely like more of a what we would think of as a Greek person, and that is Senusret III right here as a young man. Here's another one of him as a young man, and I use this in my other video here, and you can still see his sallow eyes, so they want to show you that. And again, his ears are not pinned back but pulled quite forward, so we see that here. So that's kind of what he looks like. Here's another one that's famous. It's kind of famous when people look at all this to say that his bridge of his nose here is thinner than in every single other depiction. Other than that, the eyes are there, the ears are pretty much there, a little bit pinned back here and so on. And I don't know if this was some interpret. We don't know what the nose looked like because it's shattered off, but we can guess, I guess, that it looked just like the ones in the other ones that there are a few of that didn't shatter off. So, quite different. And in his tomb, too, you see all these people here. This is, yeah, from a Negrocentric site, so it's all been darkened. But amazingly, these are alkaline-nosed, long-nosed Caucasians that are tan, and they all have blonde hair. And it's not just like one of them, but they all have blonde hair. And, well, I guess we can end it with that. Let's end it with this blonde and blue-haired and Egyptians. Let's see if we can find that. Surely people think that doesn't exist. Well, the current Egyptians, looking at genetics, don't actually match these people, and they have that trait. But the ancient Egyptians did have blonde hair, blue eyes, red heads, and all that type of stuff. And who are those people? Well, they're definitely not sub-Saharan Negroes. It's odd, the people that try to tout all this are the West African primitive sub-Saharan Negroes, which really didn't even know Egypt existed, but they do want to try and covet that, or the Bible. They try to say they're part of the Bible now too and things. So anywhere really, anywhere except for West Africa. So blue-eyed, blonde, redhead Egyptians. Let's try that. So in here you can see all these earlier dolls and stuff that had it, and oh man, it doesn't show good in this picture. This is whenever it turns, it's weird, but they turn gray and hazel as you get to an angle. When you get straight onto them, and you can see through this eye here that they light up and turn a lot more blue. But blue here, see if I can just find another picture of even that exact same statue, but a little bit more facing correctly. There you go. There's those blue eyes right there. Oh, that's Hor-Aha right there himself. So, no. Man, I put in redhead Egyptian, it shows everybody else. This right here is from the early 4th Dynasty. This is Nefret. Renifer is her husband, which I'll probably try to show you a picture of here in a minute. You can see her blue eyes and her definite Caucasian looks. Her fake mop type wig, but her hair up under it. Yep, and sure enough, King Tut, the Caucasian. And oh, you'll get all people kind of trying to do anything they can. There's some natural auburn hair. Oh, well, it's got henna in it. It's Caucasian hair with henna in it. Well, look, her skin's dark. Whenever they mummify even the palest of people, they turn dark like that. Mr. Mummy, Bob Breyer himself, legally got to do a mummy here. God, it's been 15, 20 years ago. And whenever they did, it turned dark and mahogany just like that. You can watch the video, just look it up. Here's Zahi Was looking at the red hair of Ramses, and they had it all cultured. Now, the reason all this stuff is kept oddly held from people is that, well, the current population there don't have red hair, and they don't have blue eyes. And so, why would, yeah, and they try to keep it from the idea. Buddha has blue eyes. And I'm not telling you it. They are in their temples. Yep, the original Buddha had blue eyes. In fact, the ancient Sumerians had blue eyes. The ancient Egyptians had blue eyes. Nefertiti only has one blue eye left. But man, everybody threw a fit whenever they made a statuette out of her here recently. And yeah, it's funny. The people that were making that big fit were people that were really descendants of West African primitives and had no connection whatsoever, even to Nubians. So to have even brought it up is in an odd way disgusting. Oh man, I've got these Caucasoids here, man. Got to show you up these long-haired cranium people. What's wicked about this is they figure out their genetics don't match the genetics of South America. They match people from up here right above the Caucasus Mountains and the Black Sea from ancient times, and Proto-Indo-Europeans that were up there too. That's freaking amazing. But we'll get to that in another video here shortly. And we'll also look at like Etruscans and things like that. Oh yeah, so there's this guy online, he's like, Etruscans were black. And then you look at something like this, and there's a tan Caucasian and a light noble. And he's even a redhead. And you're like, okay, well, where's the black people at? It's funny how they try to claim everything but what they were. They even try to claim Jesus Christ himself. He was a black man. Or they want to make sure that you think that he wasn't Caucasian, that he was Middle Eastern. And you're like, Middle Eastern people are Caucasian. What the hell are you talking about? Then they get real mad. And they usually start cussing you and calling you a Neanderthal or something, so they have to reach back 40,000 years for an insult. It's kind of disgusting again, but it just keeps going from there. Oh, yeah. What does that say? New research shows that some ancient Egyptians were naturally fair-haired. Kabang. You see this right here. See that right there? Yeah, well, it's not new research. It's been around a long time. People just aren't realizing it. Also in Peru, blue-eyed mummies, Peru, Wari, cloud people, actually predating this stuff. Oldest mummies in the world, and even are Caucasoids. So you can see that too. And yeah, so back to these Egyptians and these Sumerians. And you know, the Sumerians had this symbol and comes down through Mithras and all that type stuff. And they all got blue eyes. And then you look at these Egyptians and they got this symbol and they all got blue eyes. And the snakes curled up and went hiss. And here they're laid out. But what's the difference of the two? Well, time and culture. And I've got videos that show you that what kicked in the actual pre-dynastic Egyptians were influxes from ancient Sumeria. But that's a story for a different day, I'm sure. We've also got a video here showing to the Dogon people, where even the Zulu leader himself, Fredo Mutwa, tells you that ancient Caucasians they thought were spacemen came and told them about the stars. And everybody says, oh, the Dogon knew about stars. And it's like, man, they don't know how to count above on their fingers. But here's what the story is off of it. Just like ancient Zimbabwe, the locals there tell you that it was white people that built it. And just like the Lilibela in Ethiopia, they'll tell you that white people built that too. But then, of course, Caucasians used to always be up through the Horn of Africa and so on. I don't know, let me cover another topic here. Caucasians. What are Caucasians? Well, they're going to show you a bunch of pictures, but let's not go to that. Let's go to a definition of Caucasians. We'll go to Wikipedia. Caucasian race. It's also called Caucasoid or Europoid. It's a group of human beings historically regarded as a biological taxon, which, depending on which historical race classifications you use, have usually included some or not all of the ancient and modern populations of Europe, Western Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa. What's in between North Africa and the Horn of Africa? Egypt. And they tell you that that's where Caucasians naturally were back in the day. Yeah. Oh, Hamites of the Bible. Let's just knock a couple out here real quick, guys. Hamites, biblical term, ethnology and linguistics for a division of the Caucasian race, and the group-related language populations of the Hamitic, Berber, Cushite, and Egyptian branches of the Afro. Oh, yeah. But this nomenclature gradually fell out of favor between the 1960s and 80s. I wonder why. In a large part due to its perceived association with colonial paternalism. The populations of Hamitic ancestral stock are now more commonly known as Caucasoid. Where are they? Well, this map will show you that at this time, they're all over the Horn, all through North Africa, and they show them even into the Sahara real bad, with the Tuaregs and the Berbers and all that. Now there's been a Green Sahara project way down into here, and the Green Sahara project shows ancient Caucasians way back, and they've actually got their genetic code out of them too. So, yeah, kind of interesting, kind of neat, and those amazing Egyptian Caucasians. What will they do next? I heard that they can fly now, and somebody said they went to the moon and back, but that's just crazy talk, right? Peace.